Hail to the cross. I have notes that I wrote down, I just don't know if I want to use them anymore. So if my thoughts are disorganized, my apologies. But we're celebrating again the Feast of the Cross. The church's actual Feast of the Cross is, well, we have multiple, but the original Feast of the Cross is always during Lent. And because it's in Lent, the church made sure we had a separate celebration of the cross outside of it so that we could actually have a full celebration of the Feast of the Cross. And then we also have it on April 5th, which is the commemoration of the crucifixion, is the other time that we do. But I guess I don't know if I want to talk about what I had written down or not. I'm glad that this is the icon that we have up, because I think when we're used to celebrating things, we forget the cost of things. And so we just have parties, and then we don't take into account or appreciate what caused the celebration, right? It's very easy, like the psalm says, when a woman is in travail, it's painful, right? The joy comes in the morning, and it even says, and then you forget what had gone through, what the cost was. But I don't think that we understand in our modern context the brutality of the cross, and consequently the beauty of the cross, or the sufferings of Christ. We sang the hymn earlier, Fa'itof Inf, right? This is he who has been crucified for us. His Father smelt his sweet savor in the evening on Golgotha, right? And it says, for the salvation of the world. I wonder if the this is he is in response to the Gospel of John, where when they are literally interrogating Christ, is that he says, when the Son of Man is lifted up, then you will know, and again, if you look at the Greek, that I am is he, right? That then you'll know that God is he. That's going to be the moment. That's going to be the moment of glory, and that is going to be that will be when you will know who the Son of Man is, right? That he's saying that the moment of my identifying myself is actually on the cross. That is the hour of glory, which is not what we would like to talk about, the hour of glory being the resurrection, right? But the hour of glory is in the crucifixion. The hour of glory is in the intentional, voluntary suffering for the salvation of mankind, right? And what makes something like giving, everyone talks about carrying their crosses, which we'll talk about in a second, but what made it life-giving was one, that it was true, right? It wasn't built in a lie. It wasn't a proclamation that wasn't true. That was that he accepted it, that he chose it, right? And Christ said this over and over. Everyone talks about the suffering of Christ, which is important, but he reminds the Jews occasionally, by the way, no one has the power to take my life, right? Like, none of you have authority unless given him. I lay my own life down of my own will. Right? This wasn't something that he had to do. He could have, in a command, ended it. He could have avoided it. He could have done other things, but it's that it was voluntary. And because it was true, and because it was voluntary, and because his claim was true, that he really is who he is, only then was it life-giving. Now, we use the language of, you know what, I just need to carry my cross. And we'll say things like, Kim kinda salibak, right? Maybe that's her cross. And it might be. I just know always if what we're talking about with the cross really is that. Because it's not a real cross if you've caused it, right? If your behavior makes everyone hate you, forgive me, salivak, it's not your cross that they don't like you, it's your behavior. If you've been stealing from people and they don't trust you, that's not your cross, that's a consequence, right? That there's things that we do. So it's not that, because sometimes you're like, oh wow, this is just my law. I can't believe God gave me this cross that's so heavy. He didn't give it to you. You chose it, and you. It's not because it's something that wrong that we did. Sometimes we make up suffering. That's something that's only true when it's true, right? Sometimes we say, you know what? I've decided that, like, for the sake of virtue, I am not going to take a salary. And then you complain that you're in poverty, right? And say that my cross is my poverty. I'm like, no, you chose it. No one asked you to. There was no command that said that. You commanded yourself, and this isn't a cross, right? And sometimes there are crosses that we take that weren't from God, but also weren't from ourselves, right? Perhaps it's that the world is treating you in a certain way because of its cultural norms, and I'm speaking about when it's not due to truth, where truth is its own category that we would deal with, right? Or maybe that somebody spread a rumor about you that got believed, and so now you're suffering as a result of it. So yes, you are bearing a suffering, and the suffering is not your own causing, but it's different from saying that God gave me this cross when it might actually be the choices of others that are causing the suffering that you're in. That still can be meaningful suffering. I'm not saying that suffering is not meaningful, but just saying that's different than the taking up of the cross. But it has to be because of truth. The claim within it has to be true. But for us to claim that God has laid on us a cross is a very bold claim, right? I'm not saying that God doesn't allow crosses. I'm just saying for you to claim that this is the one is a bold claim. It requires a certain amount of discernment. But he told us, blessed are you when persecuted for righteousness' sake. Right? So a suffering that is for the sake of truth, and here I mean capital truth. I don't just mean random truths and my truth and your truth and whatever the social narrative is. I'm talking about the truth. Suffering for the sake of the truth is when there's something different about it, right? And only when it's suffering for the truth does the ugliness of the situation become something beautiful, right? Imagine, just to completely divorce the analogy, imagine if somebody goes through prison for 4 decades who knows he's innocent, right? And withstands it for the sake of his wife outside of the prison gates, right? What gives him the ability to withstand the suffering is what? That it's true, right? That it's only because it's true. If he knows he's guilty, he's not going to be able to go through it, right? It will affect his mind, right? Now, to the spouse who may or may not have believed him, right? If this withstanding the sentence and going through the legal process of decades of appeals and progress and all this stuff, whether she originally did him or not, if there's a statement of innocence, what does suddenly those 4 decades in prison look like to her? Suddenly, this is one of the most beautiful things in the world, right? It went from this ugly thing, this thing of shame, this thing of humiliation, that my husband is in prison because he allegedly did this, and she's not even sure if he did or didn't, right? When it becomes known that it is true, that he is innocent, suddenly that prison sentence becomes a symbol of what? Of love, of long-suffering, of romance, of kindness, of perseverance, and suddenly has a different meaning, right? And this is the cross to the church. The cross was the most hideous way of punishing somebody available in the time of Christ, right? This was why we talk a lot about how St. Paul the Apostle wasn't crucified, because he was a Roman citizen, right? Because to anybody, because of how heinous it is, because of how disgusting it is, because of how humiliating it is, the Romans don't allow it for their own citizens. It was an ugly, reserved only for non-Romans, right? And the process of crucifixion, which is ours, is a very cleaned up graphic, right? He's on a brass thing. No, everything is very clean. It wasn't clean. It was actually it was ugly, right? Is that you've got the whipping, you've got the flogging. I'm sorry to get graphic, and sometimes they would put spears up from the person's behind, and it would pierce through their body. They would make them do the walk of shame. The walk that we know about Christ, where they compelled Simon of Cyrene to carry it, was a walk of shame. It was a known walk of shame. It was, let's show everyone that you're the guy who this is about to happen to. They would sometimes bring the person's family in front of them while they're on the cross and murder them in front of the person being crucified, so that they would have to watch it and be unable to do anything about it. I'm sorry again I'm saying like, this is reality. I'm saying this was hideous. And I think if we don't understand it was hideous, we don't understand how psychotic it would have been to a Roman to say that's God, first of all, or for somebody like St. Paul to say, God forbid that I should boast or show off or take pride in anything other than that. Right? We suddenly went and took this thing that is hideous, that is ugly, that is humiliating, that you don't wish upon your worst enemy, and we put them up as the poster boy. Can you imagine in the 21st century, lethal injection is clean, okay? Electric chair is not clean. Can you imagine if the poster boy for the cause, or the logo, since everyone needs to have a logo now, if the logo was an electric chair? Imagine people's reaction, right? It would be like, oh, that's nice. You'd be like, oh, what's up with that? There'd be an understood social understanding like that. That's weird, right? That's not a normal proclamation. But that is what we did, is that because of the truth of his crucifixion, and only because of the truth of the resurrection, right, is that it tied to the success when the person was found to be innocent, because of the success, if you will, of the mission, because of the resurrection, it transformed the meaning of it. Had Christ not rose, it would just be an ugly picture, right? It would just be like he was just another guy who got killed. Maybe he's not who we thought he was. But because he was killed in the most heinous way, in the most brutal way, and then conquered, it suddenly made the most heinous thing mean nothing, right? It completely took away the meaning. It took away the meaning of death. It took away the meaning of suffering. It took away the meaning of this humiliation, because he humiliated the humiliators by standing up after it, right? It was saying that your power has nothing over me, because the power was in the truth. The power wasn't in his conviction, right? The power wasn't in his belief system, right? The power was an inherent truth that was known to him. It wasn't false. It wasn't a theory. And that's why for those who believe, the cross is a symbol of power and a mechanism of power, right? That this wooden thing that we use is something that's beyond powerful, right? The first story in the Paradise of the Fathers in the Arabic version of the Paradise is a story of a monk who was stuck sleeping in the wilderness and had no place to lay his head. And so what did he do? He did the sign of the cross in all four directions, laid himself to sleep. When he woke up, he saw scorpions around the perimeter of where he signed himself, right? That is the power of the cross. Without getting into details, one of my first experiences after struggling with faith was seeing a true exorcism. And I remember when I saw the power of the sign of the cross, because to me that was theory, we were like this when we did the sign of the cross, right? Just being, yeah, Ben Leslie. Kind of thing. When seeing that the sign of the cross actually had power over Satan with my own eyes, and especially as a Canadian kid who thought it was folklore, I just remember thinking this Bism Salib stuff is real, right? And that expression shouldn't be a cheap expression, Bism Salib, in the name of the cross, right? That should be something fast to our lips as it was, not something folklore that we make fun of the Tetas and Giddos as if they're superstitious. That the power of the cross is real because they beheld and saw the power of the cross. That the power of the cross gives us power over thoughts, right? That the power of the cross gives us power over the enemy, right? That this is, and the reason it gives power is because of Christ's death and resurrection. That's the only reason. Otherwise, it's just an object, right? The object was given meaning because of the one behind it who gave it meaning by his own suffering resurrection, right? That the moment of glory was in the accepting of that people are going to say and do terrible things, but it doesn't matter compared to what is true, right? If what is true is what is fought for, then the truth always brings life. May God grant us that we put in our lives the understanding that Christ said that if anybody is to be mine, if anybody has any identification with me, then they must, not they ought, not I suggest, they must take up their cross and follow me. If we are not prepared for the sake of truth, then we will not participate in the glory that comes from it, and we will have lived for nothing. At the end of the day, it was the rest who were humiliated, not Christ. They didn't die with him, they weren't crucified with him, but they got nothing, right? If we want to live worthy of the calling wherewith we are called, then the calling is to an acceptance of suffering. I'm not saying a seeking after suffering. I'm saying an acceptance of suffering, right? That of understanding that if I'm going to walk according to what's right, there are going to be people who will not be happy, and there will be consequences. And so what is it that I choose? Do I choose secular comfort, for lack of a better word, because it might not even be secular? Do I just choose comfort, period, over truth? If so, reap the rewards. God doesn't force anybody, right? But am I willing to say that if this is true, I know that I'm going to pay for it? I know that socially I will not be accepted for my views. So what matters is, are the views true? It doesn't matter how the others view my views. Is it true, right? If I'm going to seek integrity because I'm in the image and likeness of God, maybe I'm not going to get the same promotions because I'm not willing to do some unethical behaviors that allow me the promotion. Am I ready to accept that? Maybe I'm going to be socially ostracized because I didn't put a rainbow flag on my office window. I'm not talking about that you should or not, but maybe I will be ostracized if I don't. Am I willing to say that that's not just something I don't do? I'm not even saying talk about who other people are or anything like that. Am I willing to accept that somebody slanders me because they're jealous of saying, I'm going to turn the other cheek because my gospel said to do that? Or am I going to go and take their reputation and drag it through the mud in retaliation for my own success? It's in the small as well as the big. We always think of the big, but no one's going to be ready to die for the big if you don't know how to suffer in the small, right? If we're not willing to bear a little suffering in the small, we won't in the big. Again, may God grant us that we put our boasting, our hope, our understanding, the identification of our unity with Him in His holy cross and His holy resurrection, that we, having been slain with Him, also may rise with Him for the life of the world. To Him be glory, now and always, the age of all.